Seeing as we spoke at Natalie's car, I thought it was about time that I gave you a little bit of a rundown of my escapades and my learnings in tuning. So I want to just give you a little bit of a view in this video of what I've been doing with my tuning, where I've been getting to, how I connect to the car, and you know, what I've learned along the way. I will be covering a little bit of the scope about what software I use, the hardware connections that we've got, but let me say before the set here, I'm a novice. I go 2 steps forwards and I go 3 steps back, but I'm learning along the way and I want to share that with you. Hopefully if you guys have done any of this, you can give me some tips. Likewise, if you've never done this before, you'll see it's not quite as scary as it seems to be. First thing I want to do is go over to the car, which is just behind us here. I'll show you the hardware connections that we've got, and then I'm going to sit down and I'll show you some of the software that I use. Okay, so as I said, we've got the old oil up and axle stand still. I'm just waiting for a new axle to come for this side. Just got the nut off of that. My God, that axle doesn't want to come out. It's a whole other story. Let's talk hardware first, and let's go up to the front of the car before we go inside. Any of you which have watched the videos recently may or may not have noticed that in the engine bay, where my 20-pin connection is, I've got this weird setup here going on. All that is the back end of an OBD plug with 2 of the pins connected together. I think it's number 14 and number 18. I'll explain why a little bit later on, but that is essentially just a bridging wire that sits in that port there. I don't use that port to connect to the car. The reason I don't use that is because I get interference from the spark plug wires using that port connection. When I started doing this process, I kept having connections being lost. So I did a little bit of reading and I learned that you can make a port inside the car. Underneath here, I've got my own OBD port. So this cable you see here, the red and the white one, that's just a standard USB to OBD connection. This is an extension, this red one. You should be able to see next to my footwell light, an OBD port connector, which just looks like that. K&D can, use USB interface, eBay jobby, and she goes into this OBD port. You can just about make out there at the tip of my finger that's plugged up into the car. So I'll just plug it in, you'll see it'll light up. There we go. That is how we use to connect to the car. I will explain that in a few moments. In addition to that, I've also got another wire in here, which is a big long cable. It disappears underneath the dashboard and goes all the way across to my AEM air fuel ratio gauge. So I've got my wideband connected to that. In just about an eye shot that I can see it when I'm driving. That I actually log separately to the rest of the DME using this serial connector. Dead easy to wire up, piece of cake, man. That allows me to data log from the car whilst I'm driving it. We've got 2 connections in here and we've got the 1 connection in the firewall. This OBD port is actually really easy to make. Essentially the car talks on what's called the K line, which is I believe a purple and white wire that runs throughout the wiring loom and runs into a whole bunch of different places inside the car. The K line is basically the data transfer line, and it runs into a load of different modules inside the car. The one that I'm tapping into here is the EWS. So basically what you've got going on there at the back of that OBD port is 12 volt power, a ground signal and the K-line signal, all plugged into the right connections inside the OBD adapter. I'm not going to go into the details of that right now because that's information that's easy to find. If you want to know how to do that, Google K-line connections and OBD ports for BMWs. You'll see it's fairly simple to actually find the pinouts for that OBD connector. I think what I did is I took one of your 20-pin to OBD adapters that you get from eBay and hacked the bugger up. In the back of there, you have the sort of male end of the OBD adapter wired into the K-line, the ground and the 12 volts. And the other end of it, the big round port part, I hacked apart and I made that connection inside the engine bay. The reason that's there is because to write to the ECU, you need to provide a certain amount of power to the DME on a specific pin. And the easiest way of doing that is to bridge pins 14 and 18, I think it is, inside that OBD port. There's no harm to it being left completely open all the time and connected all the time. The only problem with it is, in my opinion, that you don't want to leave that port open. So instead of just tapping the 2 wires together with the cap off, I got rid of the cap completely and I kind of made a new cap out of a spare OBD connector so it's sealed and it doesn't let the elements get into the bit underneath the actual part of the car. If you want an air fuel ratio gauge, they're dead easy to wire. AEM comes with instructions, so will Innovate, so will all the rest of them. Just follow the instructions they've got. Add a little bit of wire as long as you want it so that you can put the laptop somewhere in the car, it's not in your way, and you can start to data log. Welcome back to the piece of shit ancient laptop. Let's get into the gubbins of it. First of all, I don't use IMPA. I use 2 bits of software to tune the car. The first bit that I use is this amazing piece of kit called MS41 Quick Flash. And the second bit is ROM Raider. Now we'll come back to ROM Raider in just a moment. And before I go any further here, let me say a huge thank you to Pazzy88. Those of you who've watched any videos about tuning BMWs will have come across Pazzy's channel, I hope. And if you've not, then go and watch it. Without that man, I wouldn't be able to do half the stuff that I've done. He's the one that's led me into seeing if I can actually start to do some of this stuff myself. So this is the piece of software here that connects to the car and actually does the reading and writing of the files to the car. If I want to actually go and touch the DME and I want to read the file from the DME or write to the DME, I use this piece of software. So here I have a read tab. It's got nothing in it right now because it's not connected to anything. I've got a write tab that also will do a similar sort of thing. I have a clear tab that allows me to clear all the different error codes and adaptions and all sorts of other stuff. I've got the adaptions tab that gives me what the actual adaptions in the ECU are. I'll be showing you all this in a moment, so it will make a bit more sense. And then in this I also have like a live monitoring tab. That's the bit of software that does the reading and writing to the DME. How do I actually look at what the DME is doing and how do I manipulate the files? That's the most important thing. So once we've read a file from the DME, it comes off as a bin file, which is a file that looks a little bit like, let's see, where have we got some of them? This is a stock US M3 bin file. So now I'm opening it up and it opens up in ROM Reader. That's a piece of software that reads these files and is able to translate them. And I have here a screen which gives me all the different folder groups that are within that ECU, that DME, all the way down the left hand side here. And I can click on these and I can make changes to them. So for example, I can click on the fuel one, I can go into the base fuel table and it will bring the fuel table up on the right hand side. So this is a stock US M3 map, showing you up the top here the load, 25 up to 700 milligrams per stroke load, and then down the left hand side is the RPM of the car. Whatever correlating RPM will correlate to a load and therefore a fuel injector pulse width, so how long the fuel injector is open for. The bin files alone are useless. They basically look a bit like, let's see if I can use a text file to open them up. So without ROM Reader you are looking at something like that, which is a load of gobbledygook, and the only way to properly read them is to use a hexadecimal reader, which I don't have installed on here. As I said, we go into ROM Reader, and ROM Reader is an amazing tool, and I want to say a big thank you to the forum, the ROM Reader project itself, and encourage anyone out there to go and download the free ROM Reader software, support the project, actually, you know, donate some money to them, because what they've done with this piece of software is absolutely fantastic, guys. It's not the same as using proprietary DME software, like your EMU Black, something like that, but it does a damn good job at it. If I shut this one down here and then have a blank screen, up the top here you've got File Edit, Definitions, View, Logger. The logger is what I use to actually record what's going on with the engine of the car at any one time. It opens up in a separate window and it has a connection up the top here through a COM port in the car, which is basically the port you've seen me point to with the OBD connection on it. That would then plug into the laptop via the USB cable, and it will then bring up a whole bunch of parameters, which I'll show you in just a second when we go back out to the car. It will actually give me the live feed off things, but it does a whole lot more that I don't fully understand. It can give you all sorts of different tables and readouts and a bunch of other really interesting things. There's finally one more bit of software which I also use to view logs. Now once you've taken a log, once you've been out and data logged your car, you've used ROM Reader's logger, your computer has recorded a whole load of information, it will then pump out what's called a CSV file, which is what this whole table in here is all about. These create what are called logs, which you can't read if you can't read hexadecimal code or CSV codes. You can read them if you have Microsoft Excel and it pumps out a bunch of tables and charts, but the easiest way to view them is to use Mega Log Viewer. So say for example in this log that I've taken here that I've just clicked on, I wanted to watch the coolant temperature versus the engine speed, and then here I could pick for example the engine load plus let's put Vanos angle. So if I just bring those two things up there, it looks like a whole nightmare situation there, but essentially what you have here in white, you have the coolant temperature for that particular run, you've got the engine speed for that particular run, and then down here we've got the Vanos angle. You can change all the colour of these to your heart's content, guys. And the engine load. So if I take that all out there, take the Vanos angle out, essentially that should just be a seesaw up and down. That's all our Vanos does in the MS41 ECUs. So engine load is this bottom one here. This graph shows me what load the car was actually at. In other words, what power it was producing, how much air it's sucking. So this is a really useful tool for actually viewing what you've done with the car, monitoring how it's behaving, making sure the sensors are working properly. Who needs INPA when you've got this combined with MS41 Quick Flash and combined with ROM Reader? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to jump in the car, I'm going to connect this to the car so you can actually see ROM Reader working and you can view what's outputting some of this data, guys. So we just turned the car on, lambda sensor is warming up, ignition's in the second position. I also have an oil pressure gauge, an old mechanical style one, really valuable tool. I'll give me a readout. So right now the car's not running, it's sensing that AFR fuel ratio, which is a little bit on the rich side. That's because I just started it a moment ago. I don't want to do it again because I've got no exhaust in the car right now, and I've got a prop shaft that's not connected, so I'm paranoid if it does get any motion from the gearbox, it will start swinging around and making bad things happen. But yeah, that's reading essentially a little bit rich. There's a little bit of fuel sitting in the exhaust. This is kind of my view, if you've got any idea. So I can just about see it down there through the hole in the wheel, which works out fairly well. I'm not keen on gauges and pods up here, and didn't want to drill holes in the dash, so this is kind of my compromise. We've got the laptop connected and we've got the wideband connected. If I go into the logger software here, what you basically have here then are all the parameters that RunRadar can log at any one time in this huge list here on the left hand side, and I select the ones that I want to log. Now some of them will slow down the connection if you use a couple of them. I'll urge you to go and look at the RunRadar forum and get some more information about that. But just to give you a little idea of what we've got here, if I sort of get up a bit close, you can see there I've got battery voltage, coolant temperature, engine load, engine speed, fuel injected pulse width, idle air control valve, and so on and so forth. What you've got here also then is the minimum values, the current value, the maximum value they've hit, and what units you're looking at. This will then log everything here and pump it out to that logger file, which I can then look at in Megalog Viewer. At the moment, you can see here idle air control valve is at 63%, intake air temperature is 10.2 degrees Celsius, throttle position is 12.9. If I put my foot down on the throttle pedal, you'll see that will change all the way up to 90 and all the way back down again. The idle air control valve moves slightly. The coolant temperature is hovering around 10 degrees because it's cold out here right now. The battery voltage is low. Now, it's because my car's not been running a while and it's struggling for battery. My wideband sensors are also telling me the same thing. They don't like draining battery power and not being hot enough, so I might need to put the car on a trickle charger. We'll just show you MS41 quick flash quickly if we've got enough power to do that. So now it's connected to the car. You can see it says cable connected down at the bottom there, and if I press identify, it's going to tell me what ECU we've got. If I go to clear, I can then read the diagnostic trouble codes in here. I've got tank venting valve code because I don't run a charcoal canister, guys. In here it will give me the current adaptions, which is the short term and the long term fuel adaption and the knock adaptions. Now these are quite important, we'll come back to them in a few minutes. But in there you can see there's no knock adaptions right now, no short term additive fuel, no long-term multiplicative fuel. This has also got a live tab like I told you before. This is not going to start until I press start live data, and it gives me the same sort of things. So throttle position you can see increasing up to 90, back down to 12. Idle air control valve moves as soon as you do that, even without the car running. So let's stop punishing the old girl. We'll turn her off and I'll go and show you what I've been messing with. So this is the actual map that I've got in my car right now, and the map consists of a whole load of instructions to the car to tell it what to do. I'm not going to get into the scope of tuning here because I'm still learning, and I want you guys to go out there and read this stuff for yourself and learn for yourself and probably do a much better job than I can of it. I wanted to try and achieve the point where I got to where I could, you know, make my car run a little bit closer to optimum with the modifications that I've done to it, with the bigger stroker engine, the different cams. The only way you can do that is if you're actually tuning it in some way. The car has some adaptions that it can use, but they've got very limited use. Essentially what you're doing when you're tuning is you're adapting the amount of fuel, the amount of air, and when it gets burnt inside the engine. This also has functions to be able to do a whole load of other things, but going back to it, this is my fuel map for my car at the moment, which looks nice and standard. It's nothing special. Everything I've learned here, I've learned from the RunRadar forum. So if you want to learn how to tune fuel, go to the RunRadar forum in my opinion. And if you're using all this software, the guys on there are using the same techniques and they know a lot more than I do. So there's a whole thread on how to tune fuel. I've done a very basic fuel tune and I've come up with this sort of fuel table, which gives me the fuel readouts that you've just seen coming from my ECU. No enrichment and no enleanment, which I'm pretty happy with, but it's still not right. I was still running a little bit too rich up the top end. This is my base fuel map. You also have two different tables for wide open throttle detection. So this is the amount of revs the car is seeing, and this is the amount of throttle position that it will require you to see before it changes to the wide open throttle enrichment table. So this is added on as a percentage to the base fuel map table to give you a final fuel additive or enleanment essentially. So I've got here, this is set as standard MS41.2, which is the USM3 map, 63% throttle position through all this part of the map, and it will start to enrich it by all these things here. If I want to change this, all I would do is come in here, scroll out the numbers and start typing something new in. At the moment I'm going to type 11.5 in there because I think I'm still running a bit rich up the top end. It will automatically adjust it to the next available table. I can then save this, overwrite the previous one, and that will then save that, which I can then use MS41 to go and write that to the car with. Likewise, if you want to change a whole bunch of different parameters, and this starts to get extremely complicated and beyond the scope of my knowledge, and therefore I don't want to get into it too much detail for you, but you can tweak how the fuel is changed on acceleration, how the ignition changes with acceleration. You can change the deceleration tables. You can change the way it adaptively learns the fuel. There are all sorts of things here that you need to spend hours and hours reading the forums and understanding what they're about, and you'll probably be where I'm at and you still won't have a fucking clue. In here we've got how the Vanos works. I can change when it engages. This is the Vanos tables, allowing it to turn on and off at different times. Even with your things at the top here, these control bits, these are basically switches that can turn things on and off inside the ECU, like EWS if you don't want to run your EWS system, like O2 sensors, like O2 feedback, and so on and so forth. So I would stress you want to go and look at the forums and you want to get into reading it, but all you need to get started is the ROM Raider software, the MS41 Quick Flash software, and if you want to data log, then the Mega Log Viewer is a brilliant bit of software as well. So, where are we now? As with most things in life, the more you learn, the less confident you get, and you decide, do I continue doing this or don't I? Before I got into this tuning game, I knew the name of the game. I knew the basic understanding behind making sure that the air can be pumped through the engine effectively with the right amount of fuel to make it move as quickly as possible, to give you the biggest bang, the most power, and not be inefficient. I've known for a long time, and I've understood for a long time, that just bolting things to your car doesn't benefit it normally. If you just put an air filter in your car, your air can flow better, but if you don't tell the computer in the car how to actually deal with that, then it's pointless. In the old days of tuning carburetors, way before my time, I had a basic idea, even as a kid, that playing around with the jets on a carb would increase or decrease the amount of fuel, and you'd mess with the timing light on your old school cars, and that will allow you to burn that flame properly. I've gone fully down the rabbit hole, and I sometimes feel like you hit brick walls time and time again because of a lack of understanding and a lack of learning. Now, I have a lot of patience for sitting reading forums and for trying to garner as much information as I can. But tuning seems to be, from what I've learned, a bit of a black art, and the only way to learn it is to do it over and over and over again, and to try and use your experience that you've learned from things to understand what's happening and to be able to read the sensors properly. It's like diagnosing a car. Simply having a code reader doesn't really do it. You need to understand why that code's being thrown, what are the possible causes, and what are the fixes for it. With my engine, my stroker engine, one of the things that I was pretty aware of from the offset was it was going to have to run more fuel because it's a bigger engine. What I've basically done with my car is, instead of running a European 328 map, I've got a piece of software written to my ECU which is copying the software from a US M3 map. You'll have heard me mention that a few times, and what that basically means is I've got kind of like the operating system from a US M3 car. That's what allows me to output data to like a Torx on my Android phone, something like that. It also gives me more functionality in the ECU, and the ROM Raider guys in the forum that are involved with, there's more sort of support on that forum for that ECU than for any of the other ECUs that have been used on E36s. So for me, it seemed like the best way to go. It then allows me, those tables you saw in ROM Raider, there's more of them defined in the MS41.2, which is the US M3 map, than there is in the MS41.0 or 41.1, which was on my car previously. So the first thing I did was I wrote that software to my DME. It's like taking the DME, wiping off the old software that's on there and putting on a whole new skeleton, if you like. That then allows you to tune it to your heart's content. Once I'd done that, I then copied the maps from my 328 onto that DME, and I started learning with the 328. Obviously, when I got to doing the stroker, I wiped all that and I went back to using just a stock M3 map. And the name of the game is to increase the amount of ignition timing you can use up until the point where you start to hear the engine knock, and to adapt the fuel properly so that it's not too rich and it's not too lean, both at partial acceleration, i.e. normal driving, going around town, and both at wide open throttle, like you saw me mess there with the wide open throttle tables. It's a shit ton harder than people make it seem, and I'm going to admit that I have learnt one absolutely hard and fast rule, and that is that road tuning is good and you can do it to some degree, but from what I've learnt, there's no substitute for a dyno. So if any of you are out there watching this video and you've seen me do the work that I've done on cars, you know that I'm no expert, you know that I know a little bit more than the average Joe, but I certainly don't know anywhere like enough, and I'm always indebted to people out there that lend me information and teach me things that I don't understand, and I keep reading and I keep learning every day, guys. I just never stop. I've got to keep trying to, you know, crack these things. With road tuning, one of the problems you have is you're trying to essentially get the car into different load conditions all the way through the rev range of the car, and that can't really be done because you are, you know, one of the things, God's honest truth, you're normally wanting to tune in third gear and to tune even wide open throttle, which is basically the simple process of your foot flat on the accelerator all the way to the top of the rev range. By the time you get to the top of the rev range, unless you're in Germany on an autobahn, you are braking a lot. That's just the small part of it. The other part is it's basically unsafe. You know, if you're doing this kind of tuning where you have to take a log, look at it and then flash it to the car, you can't do that sort of thing in the road effectively. You need a dynamometer so that it can apply the load to the car whilst you're actually monitoring things, and you can control that whole process much more accurately, and you can tune the car much faster. My intention is to keep messing with this until I understand it a little bit more than I do right now. I think I'm at the point now where I kind of get the fueling and the ignition thing pretty well down. I kind of understand what I can push it to on the ignition timing and what I can push the fuel to, but I don't really have the ability to really see the load values that I want to see. And I feel like I can carry on doing this for a long time, or now I know what I know, I would like to go and have a proper dyno tune done so I can see what happens during that actual process firsthand. I can learn from that, and then I can take my own thing a bit further. So I can basically either embellish what I've learned and go, yeah, okay, it was on the right track, or I can go, holy shit man, I knew nothing. So that's where I'm kind of on next. Now, a lot of you who've seen my videos have seen my dyno runs that I did, and one of the biggest problems I had was overfueling at the top end. I'm still working around that, but I've got an exact idea of what was happening there. And to give you a bit of a rundown, there's a system and it's built into the DME that will actually drop more fuel into the exhaust to try and prevent the catalyst from burning out at high revs and high load. That was messing with my fuel figures, and I had a bit of help from someone on the forum that said to me, that's too high, you need to turn it down. I've done that a little bit, but I don't like going too far in case I bugger things up. So I take things in increments and just go a little up at a time and see what changes are made. So I'd like to go and do a dyno tune now to really get the best out of the car and to use someone else's experience to make me learn a little bit quicker this process. And then we hopefully will get another dyno run done. Unfortunately, I've now moved house and I've moved away from the south of England all the way up to the north of England. So those of you that watch my dyno videos from down south, I'm afraid I just can't go on that dyno anymore. It's like a 350 mile drive. But there are a couple of places locally which I'm going to investigate once this lockdown here in the UK goes, and then we can get into it. There is one other thing which I'm quite proud of that I managed to create, which I would like to also share with you, which is to do with the hardware. I've just mentioned that I changed the DME from MS41.0, the European 328 DME operating system, over to the US operating system. That process involves a little bit longer of a write to the ECU, and it can be done in the car, but the problem with that is you need to have the right amount of battery power in the car for a long time to be able to write that file. So the easiest way, in my opinion, to write that file is to create a bench testing rig or a bench writing rig. I'm going to go and get that out and get that set up, and I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of that before we go any further, because I'm quite proud of it, if I'm basically honest. So give me a moment, I'm going to go and get the bits and I'll set it up here and show you what it does. Okay, so here the mad scientist bit actually comes out. What have we got here? So we've got the laptop, obviously. We've got an OBD wire coming out of the computer, just like the one in the car. This one's just black rather than clear and fancy. That goes into an OBD port stolen from a Mercedes, I think it was, out of a scrapyard, which has coming out of it a bunch of wires, two of which connect to power and ground from an old ATX power supply. There's just a couple of DMEs, I'll move them out of the way. So it's an ATX power supply with a power and a ground, and then some data link cables and some power cables going into an old DME connector from an E36 I found in a scrapyard as well. This is then powered up off the mains. This allows me to kind of emulate what's going on inside the car hardware wise. So that provides power, first of all, to the DME and to the OBD plug, and I can then speak to everything on the laptop from here. So what we're going to do, Got two DMEs here. I think one of these is my mate's one and one of these is one of mine. The first thing I will say whilst we're here, these DMEs are Index 11 and Index 10 MS41.0 and the part numbers are 1429861. If you want to write to one of these, it's got to have the index number on it, guys. It's not got a writable ROM. If it doesn't, it's much harder to do. I'm going to plug one of these in and I'll show you what this looks like. Plug the DME in. Make sure there's none of the wires touching, they're all happy, and then turn on the old power supply. So basically this is emulating me turning on the car right now. You can see the lights lit up. If I then start up MS41 Quick Flash on the computer, we've got Quick Flash open. If I click identify, it might not work first time. We'll give it a few seconds. Nah, it's worked straight away. So you can see there, it's identified the ECU, what firmware is on it, what calibration ID is on it. It's ECU number. The car that this came from was ES94468. So if you want to look that car up, you can look that up and you can find out exactly what car it was if you look up VIN lookup. So if I come into here, I can write to this ECU now, I can clear this ECU. If I go to clear and read DTCs, at the moment the ECU is trying to search for all the sensors. So I'm going to get a whole list of diagnostic trouble codes right now because it's not connected to anything but my laptop. So if I do that, I get EWS errors, tank venting valve, throttle position sensor, EWS signal, idle speed actuator. It's freaking out, man. It's going, what the fuck's happening? You know, I'm not connected to anything. I'm not interested in that. What I'm using this for is so I can write the software that I've got. If I want to change the software from the MS41.0 to the MS41.2, what we'll do is we'll write the whole file to this first of all. This one here is what's called the full read. This is the partial read you saw me messing with a moment ago. They both match, so I can use them together. So we'll go back into the DME now. So I want to go in here and I want to write the full, so that's the full read file here. I'm going to open this up and we'll start writing this to the DME. It's preparing the ECU. And as you're going to see, this is going to take quite a long time. It's going to flash the full file here. So I'm going to pause here and I'll come back when it's nearly finished. You'll see the time will be nearly 5 minutes. Okay, so we're up to 4 minutes 19. We're getting closer and closer. It should take just under 5 minutes. Once that red bar fills up, we'll be there. This has then got the skeleton on from a USM3 car. Once we've got this structure on there, we can then write the partial, the tuned file to that structure. So I'll do that as well. You'll see that will only take about 45 seconds to do. This is why having a bench rig is worth having, because if you want to do this in the car, you've got to make sure you've got enough battery power to have the car on its second position in the ignition and have it just sitting there basically doing nothing, not running, and you're eating all the power out of the battery. If it drops too low, you're going to brick the DME and the DME is fucked then, so you're basically in the shitstorm. That's done. I now need to turn off the ignition for 10 seconds, so I'll turn off this power supply here. We'll let it basically reset itself and we'll turn it back on. Give it a few moments just to get its crap together. For some reason they always take a few seconds just to get power booted up. We'll then come in here and we'll identify this ECU. I'm expecting this to look the same as it did at the top, just for the record. Right, so this time we've got the same details, we've got the firmware, we're happy. I'm now going to write the partial file to this DME. I'm going to that one and we're going to open that and that will immediately start to write the partial file on. It's much faster. Okay, 32 seconds. So it'll ask me to do the same thing, turn it off for 10 seconds to reset the ECU. So now I've got the US stock software on that DME. I've now written the file that you saw me adapt onto that DME. What I'll then do is I'll read the information off of it and I'll bring it up in ROM Raider so you can see if the fuel table that we messed with, the wide open throttle one we changed to 11.4, will then show up again. There it is there. So if I double click it, it should open up the ROM Raider straight away. And then in here, it will look almost exactly the same as it did before, with a bunch of tables down the left hand side. Hopefully with the right software at the top, 13 adapted. All the same details. If I go back into the fuel here, and we'll go to the wide open throttle enrichment, there we go. We've got the 11.4 in there. That is the file written to that DME now. Now I now have a DME which is a clone essentially of the DME in my car. The only change I've made is this one here. I could then take that DME and put it in my car and run it. The only thing I would have to do is mess around with the EWS. This is a different DME, so it's looking for a different EWS code. I would need to disable the EWS to be able to use it in the car. Right, I'm running out of battery pretty rapidly in the camera, so I'm going to wrap this up here and I'm going to say that is what I've learned, what I've got in the hardware I use to mess around with the ECU on my BMW E36 stroker. Hopefully it's given you a little bit of an insight into the massive mountain that I've had to climb and shown you that I really am just a novice still. If it's given you any encouragement to go and give this a shot yourself, then go for it. Have a look at the ROM Raider forum, and as always guys, if you've got any questions or comments, stick them down below. I've got to run, the cat's getting on top of the M3 and I'm going to get a bollocking if I don't get him off. Thanks for watching guys, that's it for now, Pamo out.